So about a week ago, I wanted to watch a movie I hadn't seen before, and I wound up settling on the 2012 somewhat horror movie, mostly parody movie called The Cabin in the Woods. This is a weird one that I've wanted to see for a long time, and then several delays plagued the film after it was completely done with production. So the film finally got a theatrical release 3 years after they were done filming, and then I didn't even see it in theaters, but as a casual Netflix watch almost a year after everyone else saw it. Not to be a hipster on this or anything, but my interest in this movie actually dates before anyone knew much about it. Back when I was much more into Joss Whedon than I am now, I read that Whedon wanted to do a horror movie, and I was interested to see what he might want to try and do. And at some point in between knowing only the name of the film and the release of the film, I lost my interest. Primarily, this happened because Whedon tends to think a little more highly of himself than he should. When he was promoting the movie, I don't know if this was after it was all done filming and he expected it to be out soon, or if this was after the script was finished. He essentially said that this would be the horror movie to end all horror films. Say what you will about Whedon, but nobody will say that he has a lack of arrogance. Now, touting up your film as the be-all, end-all of any genre is automatically going to put me off of it. I have no other choice. If I go to see the movie, I'm going to have high expectations because of asinine remarks by the filmmaker. I'm not sure if I was ever completely done with Cabin in the Woods, or if I was just wanting to put some distance between the promotion of the film and actually sitting down and watching it. But by the time I did watch it, my expectations were pretty much on the floor. I should also mention that I'm not a tremendous advocate of horror movies in general. I'm not flat out against them or anything, but they're just not really my bag. And ever since I saw The Cabin in the Woods within the last week, I've already been told that it is not a horror movie. It's a self-aware parody of a horror movie. Okay, I guess, but when I say parody, I'm thinking Scary Movie or Your Highness or something along those lines. Parody makes it sound like bottom-of-the-barrel entertainment that isn't even entertaining on a superficial level. And I would have to say this movie is better than that. Maybe if we called it an homage to horror, that is better. That's probably a better designation, but ultimately the exact genre this thing gets labeled with doesn't really matter in my humble. It's making fun of certain ideas and recurring plot points that happen in many different horror films. I'm seeing flat-out references / stolen scenes from movies like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Friday the 13th, Evil Dead, and in the third act, dozens and dozens of other horror movies. But while it's having its fun making fun of, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, serious horror movies, I also think the movie is at least trying to do actual scary stuff. When I'm told, oh, it's not a horror movie because it's self-aware, well, it can be horrific and be self-aware, right? Not to get too specific with certain scenes, but there are times where if I didn't know to expect the unexpected because this is a Joss Whedon film, I would have jumped. So while it's not necessarily scary for me, with a few exceptions, I do think the movie is trying to scare audiences at times, while also trying to make a point or something about past horror stories with the self-aware thing. Now that's probably the longest I've ever talked about the genre a film should be labeled with, or is labeled with, or whatever. Now it's time for me to talk a little bit about the actual movie. If you have not seen the movie, I will be spoiling some stuff pretty hard, so I urge you to back out now. Before you do though, I will say that for the non-spoiler one-sentence review of this movie, I think it's okay. It's not the be-all, end-all of horror movies as Whedon tried to imply. It's not even a masterpiece of film, period. It's got some flaws, and I don't just mean tiny nitpicks that I have to bring to everyone's attention because people want to make babies with this movie. I mean that there are some serious plot elements in this movie that absolutely do not float, and they prevent me from saying that this is a great movie. It's a fun movie, and I think people who like things outside of the realm of realism would probably have fun watching it. That fun you have will likely double or triple if you're even slightly familiar with the horror movies of the last 30 years or so. But as for the quality of the movie, I'm gonna say it floats somewhere between okay and good. I'm sure that defenders of Whedon just screamed because I suggested that this isn't a masterpiece, and I do intend to explain my position on this movie. But if you haven't seen it, know that that's how I feel about it. So if you haven't seen it, I really think that you should before you hear me talk spoilers, because knowing the spoilers to this movie specifically kinda takes a lot out of it, I think. Okay, so I've given plenty of opportunity for those who haven't seen this thing to leave. Now, I assume you have seen it, but if somehow you haven't, let me explain the plot really quickly, just because I'll be talking about things in the plot in this review. Real quick, here we go. We've got 5 college kids who are going to a cabin in the mountains for the weekend. 2 girls, 3 guys. They get up there, weird stuff starts to happen, they each start getting killed off by this family of zombies. Meanwhile, from the very beginning of the film, we're also getting scenes of this underground bunker that is maybe or maybe not part of a large government organization. The people here are keeping tabs on the kids going into the cabin, and they've even got control over pretty much the entire mountain area. They've got some kind of force field that keeps things inside, with only the small under-mountain tunnel as a means of escape. They can control temperature, how much light can be seen, and numerous other things. For the first half of the movie, it basically acts like Friday the 13th or Halloween, just with these weird scenes of people in a lab talking about the kids and spying on them. But as the movie keeps going, we find out that these people aren't sick freaks who like to torture and play mind games with the kids in the cabin. At least, in their minds, they're doing this for a good reason. And we find out near the end of the movie that every year they go through this elaborate method of killing 4 or 5 young people to appease the ancient gods who used to rule Earth thousands of years ago. And thanks to the stubborn resistance to being killed from the last 2 kids left standing, everyone on Earth is going to die, and cue credits. Okay, there is a lot about this movie that I think is very clever and works remarkably well. The idea that the kids in a slasher movie maybe aren't really stupid, but are actually being manipulated by some dude in a sterile, safe environment, metaphor for the writers who control the plot, or the audience who gets off on seeing the people on the screen die, you be the judge of that. To act stupid, that's quite clever. In reality, if you're being chased by zombies, you're not going to say, we should split up. And this movie pokes all kinds of fun at that, and it really works. But then there is so much more about this movie that I think should have been left behind in the first draft of the script, or it should have been elaborated on a little bit more so that it would make more sense in the movie that we got. One of the guys in the lab says that the virgin girl's death is optional. Okay, why? Did the ancient gods tell you that thousands of years ago? Or did you fail to kill the virgin girl the very first time you guys did this sacrifice thing, and when you realized that the world wasn't dead, you decided that it was okay to let her live every year? And speaking of the air quotes roles that each of the kids play, we're told that the sacrifice needs to be of 5 specific types of people. The athlete, the scholar, the whore, the fool, and then maybe the virgin, depending on the situation. And we know that these 5 people don't really fit those roles as much as the kids from some other horror movie would. The air quotes virgin isn't really one. The scholar guy is just as much of a scholar as the athlete, and is just as much of an athlete as the athlete. We know that the lab people are messing with the behavior of these guys so that they will act like the roles that they need to fill. But exactly how necessary is it for these roles to be filled? We see that there are similar labs trying to make sacrifices to the old gods all over the world, and the one in Japan has apparently manufactured a scary ghost inside a classroom of preteen girls. I'm sure this is a reference to some Japanese horror movie that I have not seen, but in the context of this movie, it makes little to no sense. I'm pretty sure in a classroom where all of the people look like they're maybe 9 years old, you're not going to find a scholar, whore, or athlete. So if this is just an arbitrary thing that these people like to do, but it's not really necessary, then why do it? I get that the reason they don't just dress in robes and throw people in a volcano like Franz Kran's character suggests. They got bored doing that, so they turned this necessary thing into something that's a little bit more fun for them to do. But if it doesn't matter who dies and in what order they die, then why not actually treat it like a game? We see the people in the lab take bets on which monster the kids are going to accidentally release that will kill them. Why not take bets on which kid will die first, and how soon it will happen, and if any of them will survive, or if they'll all bite it? Again, I get what the film is trying to do. It's making fun of the all too predictable pattern that most slasher films follow, down to all of the victims falling into the very clear archetypes that they usually fill in all of the other horror movies. But in this world, we see this idea getting abandoned almost immediately when we see what's going on in Japan. So either take this idea and actually run with it as far as you can, or just abandon it and do something else. But don't try to have your cake and eat it too. And if you are going to play around with the idea of the standard horror movie being manufactured by people from behind the scenes, then let's have some exposition about the rules these people seem to think they have to follow. The big leader of the whole organization tells the final two standing that the sacrifices have to be young. Okay, again, why? Did the ancient gods leave you a manual that you have to follow to the letter every year? Was there a sacrifice in 2000 BC where someone sacrificed a bunch of 30-year-olds and that didn't appease the gods? And if so, then wouldn't the gods still be roaming the earth to this day? Oh, here's a good question. When the first two people die, we see the guys in the lab go and pull these lever things, and we see their blood get drained into this weird chamber where the ancient gods are sleeping below. And then the third guy to die is the scholar dude, but he gets stabbed in the head, and then the RV he's driving crashes into the ocean. So, did his blood get sucked into that chamber somehow? Is it the thought that counts, even if his body doesn't get the blood to the place where the gods want to be appeased? And then we have Franz Kranz's character, the Fool. We think he's died at the hands of the zombies. The people in the lab think that he's dead. But then they find out later that he did not die. So let me get this straight. You were somehow able to monitor the heart rate of all of these kids when they were out swimming in the lake. Did you just forget that you had that technology at your disposal when you thought this guy was dead? Did the still beating heart not indicate to you that he was still alive? Is pulling the lever so that the blood gets sucked into the chamber below not even necessary at all? If it is necessary, did you just forget to pull the lever when you thought the fool died? Or did you pull it and nothing happened? Here's something I found myself wondering about while watching the movie. Incidentally, if I'm not buying it during the course of the movie, that's not good. It's one thing to realize there was a plot hole after multiple viewings or after months of thinking about the film. But to notice the problems while watching the first time, that means the movie probably isn't trying as hard as it could. Anyway, we see that the people trying to sacrifice these kids have some gigantic field where they can basically control all of the conditions. But we see that they're at work outside of the mountain area as well. We hear that they've put chemicals in the hair dye that the horror character uses. We hear them say that they treated the marijuana that the fool uses. But how exactly do they do this stuff? What if this girl didn't decide to dye her hair? Would these guys just be out of luck and she wouldn't act as much like the whore that they want her to act like? Or do they put chemicals in all of the hair dye at Walmart? If the world didn't get destroyed at the end of the movie, then would the entire city where these guys are from have an entire population of people acting significantly stupider thanks to the chemicals that these underground people put in the hair dye? How do they know which marijuana is going to Franz Kranz? Like the hair dye, are they targeting entire fields of marijuana and they don't care that thousands of people are going to be drooling idiots thanks to their interference? How did these guys even know that these kids are even going to go to the mountain? We're told early in the movie that one of these characters apparently has a cousin who recently bought this cabin, and they're all going to stay at the behest of the cousin. However, we find out at the end of the movie that none of these guys actually has a cousin who bought this cabin. So apparently these lab guys have been messing around with their minds a lot longer than in the context of this movie. But how? What makes them decide to target these 5 kids specifically? How were they able to trick one of these kids into thinking they had a cousin who bought this cabin? Like I say, a lot of this is just the writers forgetting to explain stuff to us. Or they're too attached to the idea of playing with these toys, so they allow gigantic plot holes to creep in so that they can use a few ideas, or they did explain certain elements, but they got cut in favor of other scenes. Some of this stuff is, if I'm being honest, things that the writers were no doubt aware of, but they allowed the plot holes to happen so that the plot could happen in the way that they wanted it to happen when they outlined the broad plot of this whole movie. I think the movie could have been absolutely fantastic, and something that I'd return to more than once a year. But as is, I feel like there's just too much in this movie that is not working. And the real devil of it is that there is no excuse for these problems with the movie to even happen. Much as I am not a worshipping fan of Joss Whedon, the man has talent, and he's familiar with the craft and how to work it. There is no reason these fundamental problems with this movie should be here when this crew is behind the movie. I expect better from these guys, and as such, this movie sort of feels like when a child prodigy draws a picture that looks like a 1-year-old drew it. So that's my thoughts. This movie floats. They float. somewhere between okay and good. I will probably watch it again someday, but it's not at all the movie that it had the potential to be. Anyway, I hope I have not infuriated someone who loves this movie, and if I have, maybe you can tell me what you think of this movie and this review in the Be Gentle With Me, or you could make a video response if you don't think the comments leave you enough room to explain yourself. If you like this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more reviews and other kinds of videos. That's about all I have today. I will be back tomorrow with another kind of video. I hope to see you there. In the meantime, have a great day.